Hello, everybody. Greetings, book lovers everywhere, and welcome to E-Train Talks. I'm your host, E-Train. I'm a 13-year-old literacy advocate, podcast host, and booktuber. And today's interview is one I've been looking forward to for a long time. As a kid who started my reading journey, actually only reading nonfiction for a long, long time,
Yay!
I'm especially excited for today's guest because I'm speaking with an award-winning author of more than, drumroll please, 50 nonfiction STEM books for children. Not only that, my guest has received awards from Booklist's Top 10 Books for Youth Nonfiction category, the Pennsylvania Tri-State Young Adult Review Committee, that's a mouthful, the Mom's Choice Awards, and the Dove Foundation. So who am I referring to? Well, if you haven't guessed it already, sitting across from me virtually today is none other than the National Geographic Kids writer and fellow science lover. I mean, she's pretty much the jack of all trades. She's done everything. This is my interview with author Jennifer Swanson. Woo!
Yay! Thanks so much. That was a great introduction. I should hire you to do that all the time for me.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited that you could take time out of your day to talk with me.
I'm thrilled to chat with you. I love talking about books and especially about STEM. You said you're a fellow science lover. Yay! Yay for science.
Yay for science. Whoop, whoop.
Yes.
So, like I mentioned earlier, I've always been drawn to nonfiction. My parents have told me many times that my first interests were maps and wonders of the world and all things science. I refused to read fiction for the first 6 years of my life, which I don't know if that's had. I don't know. I guess I just my child brain was like, sure, let's just
good choices. Yes.
But now I've dived into all things, but I still always come back to my love of nonfiction, and that's why I'm super excited that you're here. Because, firstly, before we get into your actual books, I want to talk about your podcast because you're on one today, but you have your own. And I saw that recently you had the opportunity, the very special one, to interview a NASA Gateway engineer who designed a robotic babysitter.
Yeah.
And it's for your awesome science podcast. It's going to be in the description of this video. Everybody's going to be able to find it. You're all going to love it. Trust me. And so tell us about this experience and other exciting adventures you've gone on thanks to your show.
Yeah, so the podcast is called Solve It for Kids. And we are an award-winning podcast of kids and families, but we have listeners from age 8 to 80, so you have lots of people, just like I'm sure lots of adults listen to your podcast too. And this was my pandemic project. So I've been doing this for 15, 16 years, and I've met some amazing people, scientists, engineers, experts. And so once the pandemic happened, I was like, I want to get kids to understand what these people do and how passionate they are about their jobs. So my podcast partner is Jeff Gagne, and he is, we call him he's very interested in space. So he kind of brought that in, but I love all things science. So we have, oh my gosh, we've interviewed almost 224 people now.
Wow.
Yeah, the podcast has been going for about 4 years. And we get these opportunities to interview some of these amazing people. Like you said, the Gateway engineer who works on the babysitter. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with Gateway. That is the space station that they're building to put around the moon eventually.
Oh, wow.
But it won't have people on it constantly like the International Space Station because it's so far away. So they're creating AI robots to babysit it while it's
super cool.
Right? I don't know about you, but I love all things science, but robots, I just think they're the coolest. I don't know. I just think they're the coolest. So we've interviewed astronauts, we've interviewed aquanauts, we've interviewed engineers that have gone down to the bottom of the ocean. We have interviewed one engineer. She was young. Her job is to make different kinds of toilet paper. Right? It's kind of a way to introduce science careers to kids. Right. In a fun way, but you actually, you hear from the actual engineers or the scientists themselves. So yeah, you can check it out. solveitforkids.com.
That just sounds super duper interesting. And I personally, it's one of my goals to check out every single episode because, science, it covers so many aspects of just the world, the entire spectrum of everything, whether it, like you said, the creator of different kinds of toilet paper, 2-ply, 1-ply, it's all it's all happening.
It is, and that's what you can do if you're a chemical engineer. So, I
Yeah,
mean, it's really cool. I
it
don't
is
know.
really cool. And I'm glad that you share these stories for kids because science has so many different outlets, so many different careers that kids can get into, and getting started early is so important and so key to like bringing that enthusiasm, finding your passion. When you find it young, it's so special.
Yeah. Well, that's what when I go visit schools, I like to say science is all around you, right?
It is.
It's everything that you see right now. Everything is science, including you.
Absolutely.
So that's how you make science accessible and get people kind of not scared of it, right?
Right.
Like it's just there.
Yeah. And I mean, from a robot standpoint, some people find robots scary, but when you
They
go and
do.
talk to these creators of robots, when you talk about like the AI and all the interesting details, it's like sort of like a behind the scenes like horror. Like when you watch a horror movie, then you see the behind the scenes. It's not as scary
Yes.
anymore.
That is I like that analogy. That's a very good analogy. Yep.
Thank you. So now let's shift gears and talk about one of your picture books, one of your really
Okay.
interesting stories that I really love. I
Oh,
mean, it's
yay.
so interesting. I have it right here. Let me just bring it up. This right here is one book
Yes.
that stands out for me. It's called Footprints. And while
Yes.
preparing for our talk, I found out that Footprints is actually your very first picture book. And I love the message that your story shares. So can you
Yeah.
please talk about how Footprints came to be and what you really hope young readers will take away from this tale?
Sure. So, Footprints Across the Planet was a cool title that I had for, about 8 years. And
Wow.
it had different stories underneath it. Sometimes we authors, like, I love the title. I thought this is catchy, but I didn't have the right story that went with it. And I wrote this a few years ago. I taught science for a really long time to middle schoolers. And, I wanted to talk to people about climate change and some of the other things that are happening in the world, but in a positive way. There's a lot of negativity. So I was like, how do you approach this in a positive way? And I thought, footprints. It's something that everybody and every being takes every day, right? They move
Right.
forward, they make some kind of impact on the planet. And so I started with animals because everybody loves animals, and I talked about the different sizes. So there's a footprint of a fly versus like an elephant, right? Big ones like this. And then I moved from the actual impact, like the imprints, to the impact footprints make, like where they take us. They take us up to Mount Everest, like we're exploring. They take us on other worlds, like Mars. And
Right.
then I talked about the people that take these footprints and how there's people that stand up for change. And then eventually I came to, of course, we can't leave this out, the carbon footprint,
Right.
right? So
Mhm.
it's a journey of all of these different things, but the whole part of the book is that what type of impact are you making on the earth? And that's the question I wanted to leave everybody with. And it's open ended. So you could say, I'm doing all of these things or I'm doing one thing. And the answer is correct, regardless.
Right. And I think I just love your story so much because, like you said in your answer, footprints they come in so many different forms. Whether it's
Yep.
your physical footprint, your imprint that you leave on the ground, but there's also digital footprints,
Yep.
physical carbon footprints, and they all each have their own individual interesting impacts. And shifting specifically towards the carbon footprint, we all have one, like you said, and
Yes.
thinking about it in a wide spectrum, I guess, in a sort of like full picture, big picture, like we all have our own carbon footprint, and it can be pretty daunting to kind of
Mhm.
put a dent and actually change your habits or try and make a difference because it can seem like such a big task,
It
something so
does. Yeah.
huge. So, can you share some simple yet effective ways kids like me can make an impact, whether small or large?
Sure. I mean, and you'll hear these and be like, well, of course, but turn off the lights when you
Right.
leave. Turn off make sure, at night, maybe give all of your digital things a rest,
Yeah.
right? And turn them all off. So you might be charging them, but you're not using them and they're not on. When you're brushing your teeth, turn off the water in between. Take shorter showers, which I don't, I don't like that one. I'm a very long I like being relaxing in the shower, but
Right.
take shorter showers, do stuff like that. I mean, the other part about this book is I want you to do whatever you're comfortable with. Because I think when sometimes people talk about, oh my gosh, climate change and everything, we have to do stuff, which we do, people feel like, well, I'm not comfortable doing that. That's okay. do what you're comfortable with. If everybody in the world did that, could you imagine the effect we would have?
Right. Yeah. And, I personally enjoy longer showers, but like you said, whatever you're comfortable with, because we can still make an impact. I mean, if everybody just pitched in and did one small task, then
Yes.
there's 8 billion people on this earth, 8 billion people, and they're all maybe taking shorter showers, or 8 billion people turning the water off when they're brushing their
Turning
teeth.
the lights off when they're supposed to, right?
Yeah, that would have an amazing impact, an
It
incredible
would.
impact. And like your story shares, like you shared, there's so much you can do. And even if it feels like, oh yeah, that's easy, it is easy, but there are a lot of people that aren't doing it. And so you
Yeah.
gotta be one of those people that does do it. So we can
Right. And
change the world.
that's what I said, is just take one step in the right direction and it can change the world. So yes,
Right.
it's I'm glad, thank you so much, because some people read this book and think it's just about footprints, but it's actually about so much more than
Right.
that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And when I was researching, looking up, oh, what are some Jennifer Swanson books? I found this book. It's actually holding the microphone right
Ah,
here.
yes.
Very convenient. It's everything you need to ace chemistry in one big fat notebook. And let
Yep.
me tell you, I love this series. I've read the complete middle school study guides for
Mhm.
everything when there's mathematics, like science in general, but
Yep.
chemistry is one of my favorite parts of science. And I'm just, I'm gonna keep this handy, keep it in my back pocket. A little bit.
Sure.
It might not be able to fit in my back pocket. You can imagine that. When I go to high school, it's really helpful. All these stories are so useful. And if you're stuck in class thinking, oh, what does this mean? Jennifer Swanson's got the answers. So I
Not to everything, but I try.
you got the answer to some things. Nobody has the answer
Yes.
to everything. But I just think it's just a fantastic writing feat. And can you talk about how this book came out? I know your name isn't necessarily shown on the cover, but you are in the inside cover, and it feels like
Yeah.
there's just so much work that went into this. So talk
So
about
this book, yeah, absolutely. This book is a series. It's kind of what they call a licensing series. It was so it was the publisher, Workman Publishing is the one who came up with the idea for the Big Fat Notebook series, which I guess they like. I didn't know until I saw your thing that they actually kind of changed the idea for that. But I happen to know the editor who was in charge of the series, and he reached out to me because he knows I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry. So, and I taught middle school science through Johns Hopkins University Center for Talented Youth for like 14 years. Um, so he was like, "So you're a writer and you know chemistry." So, because the book is, yes, it's sort of like a textbook, right? But it also needs to be fun and exciting for kids. So they approached me and asked me if I wanted to write this. And I was like, sure. And then I started diving into it and I was like, wow.
it.
Um, I haven't had chemistry in a really long time, and some of it has changed. So I've dragged out my old textbooks, got new textbooks, and there was a lot of back and forth. There was also, thank goodness, a chemistry teacher, like an actual person who taught chemistry in high school. So she reviewed all of my work, and we kind of worked in tandem a little bit on that.
Right.
So it took about, these books can take anywhere from like 9 months to a little over a year and a half. This one took a little bit longer to come out. But they did such a fabulous job with it. And then there's all these like little images, like graphic novel type
Yeah.
things. And this was kind of before graphic novels have really hit their stride.
Mhm.
So when it came out, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And this thing has done really, really well. It was in Costco like twice, which if you have your book in Costco, it's like one of
That's
those things
true.
like, I made it, right? Like
Yeah.
so yeah, and this book is just, it's doing amazing. I My former professor at the Naval Academy where I went to school told all of his freshman chemistry students that if they ever having problems in his class, they should go buy my book. I mean, that's crazy.
That is crazy. That's wonderful. And I really like what you mentioned, how chemistry, it's changed a lot, because science is always changing. There's always
It
new
is.
inventions, new
Oh my
realizations,
gosh.
like this was wrong, but now we have this answer. So, I mean, I can only imagine just like how much I can do, like I'm picturing you just writing something and then 2 seconds later, just something on the internet pops up like completely disproving. So it's so crazy.
That has happened, not necessarily with this book, with other books I've done. Yes, because I write about stuff that's cutting edge.
Right.
So it's always happen. A lot of the stuff I write about is happening like right now. So sometimes even after the book comes out, things will change. So,
True.
but
Yeah.
yeah, science changes,
It always does. But, that's what makes it really interesting because,
right?
like, all these new inventions, they're coming out, robots, AI, just always being advanced. And I mean, it's hard to keep up. So
It is.
it must be tough.
It is, but it's fun. I mean, that's the
That's true.
research
Yeah.
part about it, right? That's the part
Right.
that I love learning. Yeah.
So another question that I have for you is, as a super avid reader of National Geographic kids books, I mean, I
Hmm.
used to devour them, I still do. I discovered, of course, Astronaut, Aquanaut.
Yay.
that's only one of your National Geographic kids books. And
Hmm.
I mean, I always find the process really interesting when you have all these series of different stories by this sort of like one big publisher kind of branching out. I just think it's really interesting, like that sort of publishing process. So can you share how your National Geographic journey started, whether from a writing or just kind of how it all began? It's kind of fun.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny. So I happened to I was this was years ago when I was kind of first starting out, and I went to a conference and I met Jennifer Emmett, who at the time was the head of National Geographic Kids Publishing, and I had a critique with her. And if you're a science author, that's who you want to work for, right? Like
Right.
National Geographic Kids, that's like the people. And so I had this idea, which she didn't end up which she thought was like, yeah, that doesn't really fit for us. And I eventually sold to another publisher.
Mhm.
But she said, I really liked your stuff. Keep sending me, so let's stay in touch. Which, if an editor says that to you, you're like, oh, absolutely. So I tried to figure out how to work for her. It took me 2 years, multiple emails back and forth. I'd be like, hey, do you have any jobs for me? And she's like, no. And I was like, okay. So I stayed just this side of like, stalking, right? You just keep,
Yeah.
and eventually I figured out and I wrote, like if you've ever seen National Geographic Kids Everything series, like everything big cats, everything
Oh,
sharks.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wrote my own version of that, like everything jellyfish, and sent it to her. And it was in the excited, energetic National Geographic Kids language, all that kind of stuff. And she was like, oh, like clearly you can now do this job, right? You showed me you can do the job. So what happened is she said, I'm going to put you with another editor. And this editor asked me a very important question. Do you know anything about neuroscience? Well, after 2 years, what do you say? Yes. I mean, you don't say no, right? So that got me this book,
Woo!
Brain Games, which at the time was a very, very highly popular TV show. So
Yeah.
so they said my research for this book was go watch the TV shows
Hmm.
and create a book, which was not easy to do, but I did it. And this was my first book with National Geographic Kids. And this book is still out. It came out in 2015, and it sold a bunch of copies. It spawned 2 board games, a bunch of other books, and it is all about how your brain works. But you can't read it sitting still. You have to stand on one foot, spin around, stand on your head, and and it's all how your brain works. And the crazy thing is, there are legitimate neurologists, like doctors, who give this book to their neuro patients, like
Oh,
older
wow.
patients, to get them to understand how their brain works and have them do all the activities with it.
That's really cool.
So that's how I got in first, and then I ended up doing a couple of books in their series for them. I helped start a series for them, and then Astronaut Aquanaut was my idea, so I pitched that idea to them. And then I did another book with them that was my idea, and it's Beastly Bionics. You probably like this one. This is all about robots and animals.
Oh,
It's
neat.
all about biomimicry, and you want to talk cutting edge. This is like this one. Look, like let's see,
Whoa.
climbing robotic inchworms. So
That's so
this
cool.
is, let's see if I can do this. This is the animal, but over here, down here, is the robotic creature they created based on the animal.
Whoa.
So, yeah, this one was really fun, and this was because, and a lot of those are not actually even real, like they haven't been made yet. So
Oh
this
yeah.
is cutting edge technology type stuff. And I loved working for National Geographic Kids. They let me do some really, really STEMmy books, right?
Those are the best kinds of books. And I've got to tell you, it just dawned on me just now that I actually read Brain Games, and I was like a long time ago.
Oh,
I mean, I didn't even realize.
yep.
It just hit me. Like, Jennifer Swanson has always been there. There's no way to escape her.
Is that a good or a bad thing, right?
It's a very good thing. I love your writing, and
Well,
I've
thank
always
you.
loved your writing, I guess.
Well, thank you. Yeah, they're a great National Geographic Kids. If you love nonfiction and science and animals, they're the best, right?
They are, right. So, my next question for you is, so I mean, obviously, when I hear the news of interviewing an author, when I'm going to be interviewing an author, I always have to dive straight into research. I was thrilled when I heard that I could interview you because, I love your books, your extensive writing journey. It's so interesting. But then I also found out that you're a public speaker too, which is just on top of that amazing. So, for those who don't know, Jennifer has spoken at national NSTA conferences, the Highlights Foundation, the Atlanta Science Festival, the World Science Festival in New York City, and even the Library of Congress's National Book Festival.
Yep.
I mean, you've done everything. Like, how do you sleep? Do you
People ask me that all the time because I wear a lot of hats.
sleep?
I love speaking. It's kind of funny. I don't know if it's because I grew up in a family with three brothers, and so I was like, look at me, right? I
Right.
mean, I love my brothers, but it was just different. For me, it's all about the audience. It's kind of like you, isn't it? Like I get energy from the audiences and, having them interact with me. The World Science Festival, I did the astronaut aquanaut with like 1,000 people or more on the lawn. It
Wow.
was it was crazy. Like I started out with a small group and I remember looking up and I was like, "Oh my gosh." There's a lot of people and we're playing which would you rather be, an astronaut or an aquanaut? I like to get my crowds excited and interested. The funniest story that I did. So I'm at the National Book Festival, which is at the Library of Congress, which is like, oh my gosh, like felt like I was like at the Oscars, right? It was so incredible. And I was there for this book, Save the Crash Test Dummies,
Cool.
which is the history of car safety engineering. And you'd be like, oh, yeah, that sounds boring. But it's kind of told through the eyes of a crash test dummy,
That's
right?
really neat.
So this was my book. And so when you're talking, you have literal, I kid you not, they give you like 22 minutes. They're like, you may
On the
speak
dot?
for, well, it was like, it must, if it's longer than 25, they literally are like, okay, you're done. You have this very small window of talking. And I mean, it's the Library of Congress. So I timed it. Like I went to my local school where my kids were my kids went to school and tested it out with a big audience because I wanted to make sure I made the time. So there were other people, there's amazing, famous authors, like adults, kids. I was very kind of intimidated. And they're all their illustrators are showing this is how you draw the book and all this kind of stuff. I want to know what my talk was? Do you have what it takes to be a human crash test dummy? And I made all of these people play it, and the adults are like, no. By the end, they were raising their hands. Yes, I would do that. So we had a lot of fun.
That
And so
sounds
I had
fun.
right, and I got to tell Carla Hayden, who's the librarian of Congress, about it, and she was like, "Oh, that sounds really cool. I might have to stop by." Now I don't know if she did, but I hope she did. Wouldn't that have been cool?
That would. But, I just think that's so interesting. And maybe the Library of Congress is the Oscars or is the Grammys because, they also have a very short time of speaking before they're like, oh, no, you're done.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
maybe it's the same people. Yeah,
It kind of felt like that.
yeah, that's just so interesting. That's so inspiring because, public speaking, it's actually the United States, I mean, I looked it up. It's the number one fear ahead of death, ahead of spiders. It's
Really?
public speaking.
I
So,
did not know that.
yeah, it's really interesting just how I guess how daunting just speaking in front of people can be. So I think it's really inspiring. I mean, I personally don't have that fear, but there are so many people that do. So
There
I
are,
think it's
yeah.
so cool that you're going out and doing your thing and talking about something that you love, because it's one thing to talk, but it's another thing to talk about your passion, to bring it up,
Yes.
inspire people to check it out as well.
Yeah, yeah, it's really fun. Well, you do a fabulous job. I was gonna say you don't have a problem with public speaking. You're doing great.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, I think science is interesting, everybody. Science is super duper
It is.
interesting, and there's always so much to it. And one other aspect, I mean, actually, I didn't even realize there were aspects of this. There were scientific parts of it. We love sports here. I mean, I
We
love
do.
sports. Everything, hockey, basketball, football, baseball,
Uh,
anything. I'm down to watch. At the Olympics, I watched fencing. So I
I've done that. I've also, I mean, we watch everything for the Olympics, but I've fenced before because you had to do
oh
that at the
really?
naval camp. It was very cool, but
It looks really fun. I thought we were gonna do it during PE at my new school, but they ended up not doing it. We're in
oh,
pickleball instead. Um,
oh, now that I haven't played. Is
it
that
looks
fun?
fun.
It looks fun.
It's like ping pong, like but tennis. So it's like a
Hmm,
mixture. But anyway,
okay.
a little bit off track. But rolling back into the question, one statistic that I've always been curious about, and I know statistics is, a lot of people don't really like statistics. Might not be the most fun subject in school, but it's there, it exists, and it's something you're gonna have to live with. And it's always interesting when you actually get to learn and love statistics, when you really figure out the inner workings of everything. And one statistic that I was like, what does this mean? Is ERA, earned run average. And I mean, I
Hmm.
knew the name, I knew it was earned run average, but how is that even, how is that even tracked? And I know it might be an interesting answer, it might be a difficult answer, it might be a formulaic answer. So I guess, what is the formula? Because if there are any baseball fans here and are curious, this is like the perfect time. Like, with Jennifer Swanson, you're gonna learn what ERA means.
No pressure, no pressure. So the way I understand it, and you guys can all like leave comments if I get this wrong, but the way I understand it, it is the number of earned runs is first of all for the pitcher. It is the number of earned runs divided by the number of innings.
Okay.
And apparently an earned run is something that is not caused by an error. So if there is an error, even though that run will count for the score, it may not count for the earned run average. Um, and I had to learn that from my book, The Secret Science of Sports, because there's a lot of math in that.
Right.
But I'm like you, like I said, I had three brothers. I've played probably almost every sport there is. And I was a statistician a long time ago
Oh.
in eighth grade for a year because I tried out for the softball team and didn't make it. But they were like, you could be the statistician. So I was like, okay. So I did that for a year. But I've ran track. I did gymnastics. Like I did a lot of swam. I did a lot of sports too. So I'm like you. I love watching sports.
Yeah, sports is super fun, and I mean, I love learning new things, especially about sports, because you can watch everybody play, but when you actually get into the nitty-gritty, like because there's so much analytics that goes into every single
There
play, every
is.
formation, like, oh, there's a
Yeah.
60% chance that you'll get a first down if you go forward on fourth here or something like that.
Yes. Yes. Well, and that's driving everything these days now that they have, all of the AI and the number
Right.
crunching and all that kind of stuff. But I also love it because I liked I mean there's team sports and there's individual sports and so you
True.
learn to cooperate with people and do all these kinds of things as a team
Yeah.
and it helps you, you actually just I don't know, it just helps with everything. For me, I'm still a runner all these years later because when I can't figure out a book, I go on a bike ride or I go on a walk or I run, right? Like
Hey.
I still use sports for my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And my next question for you is actually one that I'm really interested to hear your answer for. So, will you share what you think the most important scientific advancement in the 21st century was or
Wow.
is? And have you written about it?
Oh, wow. I mean, that's a huge question, and this I will caveat this with this is, my opinion. One of the coolest things that I think, honestly, is just how far we've come with robotics. I mean, it's amazing, and the thing is that can encompass so much, right? Like you could talk about AI, you could talk about the robots themselves and how everything's gotten smaller. You can talk about communication because they use robots in satellites, and all of these different things, robotics, I should say, in satellites, not robots. There's a robot on the International Space Station, and we talked about in the beginning about robotics for Gateway. I
Right.
mean, it's just so incredible, all of the advances that they've done in this. And for me, have I written? Yes, actually, I did an everything robotics book for National Geographic Kids. It was a few years back, so I would love to update it or write about my goal. I would love to write about AI. The problem is that's a really tough subject because like you were just saying, it changes like that. By the time the book comes out, it might be obsolete, but that's what I would love to do. Write a book about an AI brain, right? How cool
That
would
would
that
be
be?
something.
Nonfiction, not fiction, fiction that exists.
Yeah.
Nonfiction. So we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe
but
someday.
and maybe someday that would be really cool. But yeah, AI is always constantly developing. I mean, 1 second ChatGPT can't create a story, the next it's writing full-fledged essays. And it's also
Mhm.
really interesting to hear from other teachers and librarians and like just people in the education world just how it's impacting like curriculum. Because at my personal school, they went from like having essays or assignments online to a lot of them are just now you have to do it on paper in the classroom because AI is such a big problem, such a big issue.
Yes, and I think that I mean the thing is when I was a kid, which was a long time ago, we wrote in class essays. So it feels like we're coming back to that. And that is the other big question about AI is should we do it? And there's a lot, we could probably have a whole conversation about science and whether we should do it, right? Not whether or not we can. And so I think there are cool aspects about AI, like automating things. We actually had an AI roboticist on our podcast, and she takes wheelchairs and automates them with AI to help people that have, um, you know, problems manipulating things or moving their hands or whatever. That's fabulous.
That is.
Writing a whole book with AI as an author, not so thrilled about that, right? But it has its uses. So
That's true.
so that's the thing I think you have to kind of take a look at, and that's like what people are doing these days, right? It's trying to figure out how to bound this a little bit.
Yeah, AI can be really tricky because, with all scientific advancements, there's always so much good that can come out of something.
Hmm.
But there's also a lot of scary things. Because if you also think about it on a military standpoint, AI
Yep.
can like I mean, it's mind-boggling the just sort of drastic differences between like there's so much good, but there's also a lot of bad. So you have to balance it, have to think
Uh,
what are the consequences? Because there can be consequences from AI,
right.
from other, science stuff. So
Yeah, it's all about the perspective too,
true,
right? That's
right,
that's what I like to say, because if somebody creates this really cool technology and you're like, "Wow, that's amazing technology-wise," but then you have to think about how are they going to use it,
right,
right?
a
So
hundred.
it's all about the perspective. But yeah, that's probably like a whole other conversation for a different one podcast.
So now it's time, sadly, for the final question of the interview. I've loved talking with you. I've loved learning from you, but this is a question that I've never asked anybody before because I never really had the chance.
Ooh, okay.
If you could meet any science figure from the present day or past history, who would it be and why?
Oh, wow. Do I have to just pick one? There's
I
so
mean,
many.
you can pick multiple.
Um, so if I were to pick, I've said this multiple times. So if I were to pick one who's still living, one of my heroes is Dr. Sylvia Earle.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Right? She is the first female aquanaut, and she's done so many groundbreaking things. I just think she's absolutely incredible. As far as, I mean, oh my gosh, there's so many other people I would love to meet from history. You know, I grew up watching Jacques Cousteau's TV show. He had this
Right.
amazing undersea adventure with Jacques Cousteau. So I would probably love to meet him. I am thrilled to say and honored to say I know his grandson, Fabian Cousteau, because Fabian actually wrote the foreword for the My Astronaut Aquanaut book.
Oh wow.
Yeah, along with Dr. Kathy Sullivan, who I also like to meet. I mean, this could go on forever, right?
Yeah,
Those are probably some of my top three, but if you gave me more time, I could come up with a lot more.
that's true. Yeah. But there's so many incredible people who have changed the world thanks to
Yes.
their science expertise. And
Right?
it's so hard to come up with one answer. So, I mean, I'm impressed that you narrowed it down to two or three.
Those
So,
were just off the top of my head. I could come up with a lot more.
yeah. So, this has been such a fun interview. I've learned so much, and I think everybody watching has. If you haven't, then maybe watch this again because I can guarantee there's something you might have missed. And I'm so glad. Oh, oops. I'm so glad you could come and share your story with us. I don't often get to speak with nonfiction middle grade writers, so hey, if you're watching, feel free to reach out. But anyway, this was extra special for me, and in case you all didn't know, the message you'll find on Jennifer's website and books is that, drumroll please, science rocks. I mean, we all knew it, and
Science
we all know it.
rocks.
Science rocks, everybody, and
Yes.
also, maybe a science book about rocks. That could be fun.
I've done that. A couple of them.
Oh yeah, I told you, everybody, she's done it all. So
Thanks so much for having me. It was wonderful to be on your show.
yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for talking about your stories, for talking about your career, and I hope you keep advocating and writing science-based books. And I'm
Well,
so excited for whatever your writing journey may bring, whatever stories might come out into the world. And I mean, I hope all of you go and check out Jennifer's books. And I don't just hope. I mean, you have to. You should. You must. Because
thank you.
I guarantee you're gonna leave with new information. You're gonna become. Did I just become the smartest person in the universe? Because I read Jennifer
Oh,
Swanson's books. So,
oh.
and it's true because I'm narcissistic or Jennifer Swanson. So, thank
That's
you so much for
fabulous.
taking time out of your day, Jennifer. I really enjoyed this chat, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much for having me.
Bye.
Bye.